All right, Tim's been waiting for a minute here, and Tim, I don't know how to ask this except for generally. So if you have a specific thing you're talking about, then repost, and I'll ask that specific one. But Tim says this: what are the alleged contradictions that people say are in the Bible, and how to rebut? So we we could do like a 2 month series,
Yeah.
but I guess so. Unless Tim reposts, in general, when you look at Bible contradictions, what's your methodology, I guess, on rebuttal?
Right. What I do when somebody comes up with a Bible contradiction is the first thing that I do is I go through and I read the passage, and I see if it's really saying what it's saying, what they say that it's saying. And so I'll give you an example in the Gospel of Matthew. I think it's in Matthew 27 probably. It talks about Judas went and hanged himself, and when you get to the book of Acts, it says that Judas fell headlong and that his bowels gushed out. And so I was talking to a couple of Mormons one time, and they were using that as a Bible contradiction. And they said, well, the Bible's not something that you can trust because in the Gospel of Matthew, it says that Judas went and hanged himself. And in the book of Acts, it says that Judas was running along and he fell down and that his bowels gushed out. And when they said that, I was a pretty new Christian, and so what I did was I immediately picked up my Bible and I read it. I was at work and I had my Bible there with me, and so I just read the passages. And I go to the passage in Acts, and I go, it didn't say that he was running anywhere and his bowels gushed out. It says that he fell headlong and his bowels gushed out. And so what you have there is not a contradiction. What you have is a discrepancy. And this is what I mean by that. A contradiction would be Judas went and hung himself, and that's how he died. And another passage says that Judas never died at that time, that he lived long past the time of the book of Acts, and he ended up dying in his bed. That's a contradiction. When you have a discrepancy, what you look at is can those two things go together? And obviously, the answer to that is yeah. I can come up with a number of scenarios. If I'm Judas and I'm going to go out and hang myself, in the storyline that you have in the Gospels, he goes and throws money in the temple, and he is so distraught over what he's done that he decides to off himself. So he's going to go down and hang himself. Well, it's Passover. And so the local Jewish Home Depot is not open. You can't go to the marketplace and find a rope. And so most likely what he did was he used the belt that was around his waist. They were called girdles, and it's a rope, basically. It's some kind of cloth that was used to tie up his robe, and that's most likely what he used to hang himself. And so you're going to go hang yourself. You're going to do it in a way that is convenient. And the tradition, and actually it says in the book of Acts that he fell, this whole situation, book of Acts and the Gospel of Matthew talks about the fact that he was buried in the place where he died, which was the field of blood. And it's a place where the potters used to take and throw their busted up pottery that they didn't want to fire. And so we know where that place is, and it has a cliff going around it. And so right there, you can take and come up with a scenario that has both those things in it. So Judas goes out and he finds a tree that's overhanging that cliff. That would be the easiest way to do it. What's the movie with Tom Hanks when he was on the island?
Oh, Castaway.
Castaway. It's just like the Tom Hanks thing. He's up on the top of the hill. There's a tree with a branch out there. He's going to hang himself, and he throws a dummy out there. And in this instance, Judas just ties up his girdle up on top of that, wraps it around his neck, and hangs himself. All you got to do is step off the cliff, and there you go. And one of two things happen in that situation. One is that he didn't tie the knot well enough, and so he fell on a bunch of old pottery, which would cut you open and your guts would spill out. So that's one option. Another option is that he hung there for a while, and then he rotted and fell, and same thing would happen. And so there I've reconciled the two passages, they absolutely can go together, and both of those things can be true. Judas hung himself, and then he fell headlong. And so that's one example of a way to put those things together. When you're going through the Gospels, you're getting the stories from different points of view. And one of the things that you're always going to get when you have two people telling a different story is you're going to get detail in one story that you're not going to get in another. So I always use this as an example. The Bible, for example, talks about the guy that Jesus cast a bunch of demons out of and cast them into pigs. And they went and ran into the Sea of Galilee. In one gospel, it says that, excuse me, it says that there was one guy that happened with. In another gospel, it lets you know that there were two. And so, the question comes up, which is it, one or two? And the Bible's contradictory. Well, I went out to lunch yesterday with Matt Kessy. I'm telling you. And Mike's over here. Mike, I went out yesterday with Brandon B. And now you two get together and you have a conversation, and I've told you that I went out with Matt Kessy, and I've told you I went out with Brandon B. And you both come back to me and you go, you lied to me. Which one was it? And the answer is it was both of them. And so the fact that I'm telling you that it was Matt Kessy probably had to do with our conversation and the fact that you know something about Matt Kessy, and I just go, oh, I went out to lunch with him yesterday. In fact, I told you Brandon B. has to do with that too. And so when you're going through the Gospels, a lot of times the people that are being spoken about in the Gospels are being spoken about to people who may know them.
Right.
And so the characters in the stories are being illustrated in a way that is most effective to the audience.
Right.
And so the fact that one says one person was healed from demon possession, the other one says two, is not a contradiction. That's a discrepancy, and when you put the two together, it makes a story that much more believable because you're seeing it from two different perspectives. You have that all through the Bible. Right. And so that's basically what I do with that stuff. See what the problem is. See if those things go together. If there's a way that I can make them go together without absolutely twisting the Scripture. And most of the discrepancies, in fact, every discrepancy that I've ever run into, I've been able to reconcile without playing games with it. So
see, that was a big thing for me when I first became a Christian, because I understood enough to know that if this is the Word of God, then God had to wrote it or write it. And we believe in an inerrant message system in the original. And if there's errors in here, like, let me give you an example. I went to a church a long time ago, and the pastor's Bible study was specifically in the Old Testament. It says that they were in bondage in Egypt 400 years, and then in the New Testament it says 435 years. And his Bible study was, well, it doesn't really matter. Sometimes there's errors in the Bible. Is it really bother us? And I went and talked to him afterwards. I was a brand new believer, and I'm like, dude, that's wrong. Like, if God wrote this and these guys can't count, why am I interested in this?
Right.
And he goes, well, then what's the answer? And I didn't know the answer. Well, the answer was very simple. They were there 435 years, okay, but in bondage 400 because of the 35 years of the different Pharaoh.
Right.
Simple answer, and it answered everything that I needed to know, and it was correct because they're, like you said, talking about two different things.
Right. And in one of the passages, it doesn't say that they were in bondage for 435 years.
Exactly.
In one passage, it says that they were in bondage for 400 years. In the other passage, it's from a promise. Right. Promise was given, and 435 years later, it was fulfilled.
Right.
And so, again, you have the Bible speaking specifically in different issues, and you have to pay attention to what it's actually saying.
So every time I looked those up, it was always cool because if you take the time, usually it's like this awesome thing, and it just is like, that's just amazing because it's apparent contradiction, and then you see what the Lord's talking about, and it's like, that's crazy. The other thing I wanted to say is this really came alive to me when I started writing legal reports for the Sheriff's Department. I wrote over 100 of them. Most of them were use of force, and it would be an event where, okay, we do a use of force on an individual, and maybe there's 3 or 4 officers there. And you would read the reports, and this officer saw one thing, and this officer saw another thing, and it's like, how does that work? But in reality, like you were talking about with the Gospels, it validates the authenticity, because if those reports were the same, I know that those two officers got together and they talked about what they saw and they wrote their reports accordingly, kind of like if you copied a paper at school.
Right, yeah. It's collusion.
It's collusion.
Yeah.
But the fact that they're different is because maybe this officer was responding from this location when he got the traffic. When he arrived on scene or, in the cell, he was dealing with this guy. And it's amazing because you could be fighting the same guy in the same little tiny cell, and what they heard and what they saw and what the guy was doing is different where they were at than where you or the other person was at. And it can be an 8x10 cell.
Yeah.
Now, when you go to a pod and you go to like a 8-person fight and you have 15 officers respond, imagine what those reports look like.
Right, yeah,
and that's some of the Gospels.
Yeah, exactly.
So it actually makes it more authentic.
Right. If every story in the Gospels said exactly the same thing, the Bible would be accused of collusion. And again, it would just be accused of being a made-up story. And so you want that kind of stuff in the Bible. It's cool when it's there. So,
okay. Anything else on that, or are you good?
I'm good.